We had John Fisker, so one of the things we can talk about in our paper is that it's really felt how the body.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of an experience that could be got early.
Right.
And once you move away from there, you move into kind of a cerebral approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd agree with that. That for us, when we go to an entertainment, what do we want? Do we want an intellectual experience or do we want an emotional experience? Now, obviously, somebody's going to say, well, I go for both. But when you go, what do you go for? Do you want to feel something or do you want to think about it? I know with me, if I want to think about it, I'll go to a college class. If I want to experience it, I want something else. When I work in theater, and that's the thing I do, not so much where I teach, though, yes, I've directed musicals for them. But I'm into a community theater group, too. And every year for the last 7 years or 8 years, we put on musicals. And the thing about the musical is you want them to feel. Theater is such an immediate thing out of all of the entertainment media. It's the one that gets right to you. I mean, they're live, they're on stage, and many times they're not going to stay up there. They're going to come down, and you're going to become part of the action, too. That is at times possible, and I've always loved that idea, that direct connection with an audience. And every musical that we've done has been an emotional one. The first one we did was The Music Man, which is about as sentimental and treacly as could be. But there was a scene in it that brought down the house every night when we did it, where the Music Man was being chased by this lynch mob because they decided he was a phony who was defrauding them out of their money. And we had him race off the stage, down the aisle, behind the audience. He started going down the next aisle to get up on the stage again, and then he stopped and ran into the audience and sat on somebody's lap. And the people who were chasing him ran right back on the stage, and when that happened, they loved it. That was the part of the entire show which the audience loved more than anything else, because it was so immediate and so emotional that whatever you were seeing, you were part of it. It immediately was encompassing you. And that's something you don't see that much anymore in musicals. I don't know about the theater as general. Musicals are my area, that you don't see that you can do things like that.
Well, you see it, as you said, at the college level and the high school level, where these kinds of performances could be put on because they're inexpensive, it's good training, and what have you. Do you see any kind of renaissance with that kind of performance?
I don't know. And that's when we talk about the death of the American theater, I wonder about that. I wonder, because the shows that seem to be most popular with your audience are the older ones. For various factors, I think. Again, usually the level of writers, the people who are doing it, the composers. I mean, we're talking Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner and Loewe, Frank Lesser, George Gershwin, etc. That's the bunch we have there. Jerome Kern. Who do we have now who's comparable? And I really don't think we do have anybody who is that comparable in theater, in the musicals. The great, the ones who would have been the generation aren't there. They've gone into rock videos, they've gone into film, they've gone into concerts, but they have not gone into the musical theater as such. It just might be a coincidence that in the 60s, notice, we stopped getting the generation of great composers, and we got the generation of the great choreographers. So that you had Fosse, you had Bennett, you had Gower Champion, etc., that bunch, who created shows which were more spectacles. In other words, you want to see the big dances or the approach that Bennett would use here or what Fosse would be doing. But all of a sudden, the composers, in other words, in the 1950s, you went to The King and I, you went to a Rodgers and Hammerstein musical. That was the selling point right away. When we get to the 60s and 70s, you go to Pippin, and it is a Bob Fosse musical. And who wrote the music and lyrics for Pippin? Well, Stephen Schwartz actually did. But it's a Bob Fosse musical. The same thing with the chorus line. The name you inextricably link with the chorus line is Michael Bennett. That's the Michael Bennett show. The fact that Marvin Hamlish wrote the music, and he's a very well-known composer, is nothing. It's the fact that it's the Bennett show. So we see this influence, I guess, on the visual appearing in the 60s and the 70s with the big talents, the composers who used to dominate. They're not there anymore. They're somewhere else. See, and how do you get them back? I don't know if we can because of the changes in media and popularity. I don't know if we will. But I think the people we did get, who tend to be intellectual and tend to look back, and Sondheim, somebody like that, have taken away from the things that used to sell the musicals. When I do a show up in Houghton, or the Calumet Theater is where I do it, I can usually find that if I do something by Rodgers and Hammerstein, no problem. I will sell out that theater like anything. All I have to do is say Rodgers and Hammerstein. I don't have to put a poster up. Sound of Music, something like that, they'll show up. If, however, I say I'm doing a Stephen Sondheim show, the reaction usually is, who is Stephen Sondheim? In this show, any tunes I know, anything I've heard of, you do Sound of Music or The King and I, they know. There's a little glimmer on their face. The Music Man, they've heard of it. But Stephen Sondheim, you can say, well, he's done Into the Woods. What's that about? Any tunes? Well, he did Pacific Overtures, All of the Night Music, Bring in the Clowns. Oh, Bring in the Clowns. Then they've made the connection. Maybe you'll get more of your audience that way until they see the show. Then they will tell you it is boring and esoteric. But until then, they might go and see the darn thing. And with Lloyd Webber, Lloyd Webber is probably the one exception in one definite way. He is a pop composer who can write popular standards. In other words, irrespective of the show, he will write one tune or something in that show that's going to take off. Even the earliest one, right? The Jesus Christ Superstar. I don't know how to love him. You could hear that and yet not know it was from a musical. And you can go through Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, whatever, all the way through Cats. And you will find he has the talent of doing it. He's practically the only one. I'd say on Broadway, the one who is the throwback to the old-fashioned generations, Jerry Herman, who had that talent for doing that too. He gives you uplifting shows and whoopee-doo stuff with old-fashioned music. He's Hello, Dolly, Maine, and the titles themselves tell you the popular tunes that he's able to create out of them. But even with Jerry Herman, you see him every few years, and then you don't see him anymore. Years ago, I went to the Goodspeed Opera. They were having a convention, a conference for people interested in musical comedy. And one of the speakers there was Sheldon Harnick. And Sheldon Harnick is the guy who wrote Fiddler on the Roof, the lyrics. And he was asked, he and his partner had not written a Broadway musical by that time for about 7, 8 years. And we said, you are guys who at this period have written probably the most popular musical, the longest-running musical in the history of the Broadway stage. How come you haven't done any more musicals? And Harnick said, well, my partner Jerry Bach put it, they don't want our music anymore. They don't want our shows anymore, so we can't get the backing to do it. So they're not doing it because they don't think there's an audience out there or people who are willing to pay the way, etc. What they do think is you've got an audience for Les Mis, you've got an audience for Weber, you've got an audience for Sondheim, but not for these guys. Which is sad because I do think there is one out there. I do think if you're going to sell it on that emotional thing. The high culture thing is going to deal with a smaller audience. But all the time is they're just not going to go to think about the great subjects of the world. Who's going to take Laurie to the box social is the kind of thing usually a musical audience will concern itself with.